Since you're attacking us, can you give us a question?
Go ahead.
No, Mr. President-elect.
Go ahead.
Mr. President-elect,
Go ahead.
since you are attacking
No,
our news
not you.
organization,
Not
can
you.
you give us a chance?
Your organization
You're
is
attacking
terrible.
our news.
These papers are just some of the many documents that I've signed, turning over complete and total control to my sons. Oh, gee, I've never heard that. Oh, gee, I've never heard that. I've never heard that. You know, the only one that cares about my tax returns are the reporters, okay? They're the only ones. But no, I don't think so. I won.
I'm Lorna Dueck, and you're watching Context.
But there was one performance this year that stunned me. It was that moment when the person asking to sit in the most respected seat in our country imitated a disabled reporter, someone he outranked in privilege, power, and the capacity to fight back.
Well, Hollywood has certainly made
kind
its
of broke
collective
my
voice
heart.
known about their disdain for a Trump presidency through their boycotts, satires, and powerful speeches like that one that echoed across the airwaves just a week ago when Meryl Streep spoke at the Golden Globes. President-elect Donald Trump responded the next day with tweets saying the multi-award-winning actress was overrated. You may be surprised to learn from a few of our guests that not all people think Trump is a monster and frame him in a completely different light. Can a nation unite and keep their minds and hearts open, or is it too late? But first, here's Molly Thomas at the news desk.
Thank you, Lorna. Here are some of the stories making headlines this week. A former Ontario nurse accused of killing 8 elderly patients is facing new allegations. Elizabeth Wetlaufer is back in court answering to accusations of attempted murder for 4 more senior citizens, this time by insulin. The 49-year-old remains in custody and will make her next court appearance February 15th. And tens of thousands marched across the United States to pay homage to Martin Luther King Jr. this week. This is the 31st year honoring the slain civil rights leader. Some celebrations were marred by gun violence, with people wounded in Miami and Houston. Martin Luther King famously preached on non-violent resistance.
Unlikely to be watching it. I'm sure it'll be pretty popular, but I have no real interest in watching it.
Yeah, I've been following Trump the whole time. It's like a reality show. It's like the longest
We've been in New Zealand
series.
for the year,
Yeah,
and we've
yeah.
been following from New Zealand, so...
So you definitely will be watching on the 20th.
Definitely is a strong word. I'll be tuning in because that's probably all there is on TV anywhere. So
Yeah,
I
everybody will
probably
be covering it, so I'm sure I won't be able to watch anything else, so...
Our next guest, Ju Kim Tia, is a real estate investor who enjoys a close relationship with Mr. Trump and his family. Ju Kim Tia is the owner of the new 63-story sold-out Trump Tower in downtown Vancouver. Hello, Ju Kim. What are you expecting for Canada from Mr. Trump?
I think he definitely recognizes how important Canada is as an ally and has been a great ally for the United States for many, many years. Economic-wise and also from a political standpoint. So I think he's definitely going to continue to build on that relationship, and I think he's gonna, he understands the importance of having a good relationship with Canada.
Well, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will become a senior advisor working on trade. Given that you know the family, will the government of Canada lean on you and other business leaders like you for help with trade on those relational issues?
I doubt it. I'm just a businessman, and I'm not in politics at all. So I don't think they would be leaning on us in any way. But I think maybe what we could contribute is probably contribute some ideas of how we could just, for certain markets, certain things we do. We could be like a little think tank or discussion panel or whatever, advisory panel at the most with regards to things that we can suggest.
Well, and I would also imagine that sons of billionaires develop a unique bond. Has that been the case for you and the Trump sons?
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of that because we We understand, I guess, the environment that we grew up with, the expectations, having to live, underneath the microscope and have people sort of like judge you or like expect you to be a certain way ever since you're young. So, and also at the same time, we have to deal with parents that are very busy and who didn't have a lot of time to spend with us when we were younger. And from young, we were also trained to be successful or trained to take over the business. There's a lot of pressure from a young age.
Ju Kim, you're also a businessman with a deep Christian faith in God. Do you believe God is more powerful than any American president?
I always say, even a lot of people ask, now that Trump becomes the president, how it's going to benefit you and how you're going to take advantage of it. And I'm like, I don't really put my hope in man. I've never did, right? I've always, my number one, I guess, I depend solely on God, and He's the one that I turn to for everything. So I do believe that God puts people in your life, and puts you in different situations, and there's a purpose for all of it. And you have, in every situation, you have to do the right thing.
Does your faith in God affect you when you look at this presidency from a global perspective?
The Bible says very clearly that we are supposed to pray for our leaders. So our job is not to I guess judge people or expect that things are going to be bad or good or whatever and speculate too much. Our job is to do our job. My job is to be a businessman and do my best in what I do. And my job is to pray, pray for our leaders, and that they will have the wisdom, the courage and understanding to do the right thing in every situation.
What do you think of the way Mr. Trump is being portrayed in the Canadian media?
I think prior to the elections and the run-up to the elections, the media was extremely biased and extremely unfair. I think they have softened up a bit, and they're more, I guess, less biased now. I think still the Canadian media is pretty skeptical still of what's going to happen. So, but I think we all have to really give him a chance.
Well, you've been personally invited to Mr. Trump's inauguration. Are you excited to attend?
I'm not excited about the cold, but obviously it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for me, and just go there and just to experience it. So yeah, I'm just keeping an open mind and just glad to be there and just experience everything and show my support.
Thank you, Ju Kim. That was Ju Kim Tia, owner of the Vancouver Trump Tower, joining us from Vancouver, BC.
PureFlix.com is now available in Canada. Sign up today for your free 1-month trial and begin streaming over 3,500 titles.
It's from independent films to movies and short series.
Kids shows. Sign up for a free month. Give it a good try.
Watch your favorite content anywhere, anytime, like PureFlix original hit series Encounter. Enjoy the latest and best in faith and family entertainment. Available to you at the click of a button. Visit PureFlix.com and sign up for your free trial today. Brought to you by Crossroads.
Okay, well, joining us now, Washington, D.C., is Michael Ware, part of outgoing President Obama's Faith Council. Hello, Michael.
Hello, it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us from Washington. You've got a new book out on reclaiming hope. I love it that the press called you America's ambassador to the believers. You actually think this last presidential campaign did spiritual damage. Explain that. What's happening?
Well, I'll tell you, so I went around the country talking about the election, and it became like clockwork that the last questioner, or the second to last questioner, would begin to cry as they were asking their question. And I'd never experienced anything like that in politics before. And it became clear to me that there was something deeper going on than just sort of policy disagreements. People are actually going to politics to get their emotional needs met. And politics can do a lot of things, but meeting emotional, spiritual, inner needs is not one of them. And when we give politics that power, then we're setting ourselves up for failure.
So you think we've given way too much emotional space then to this whole political process, to what Mr. Trump's presidency is bringing out?
Well, yes, and that is not to say that politics is not important. I work in politics. I've dedicated the last decade of my life to government and political elections. What I'm saying is when we go to politics for our sense of belonging, to be personally affirmed, as opposed to going to politics to serve others, to advance justice in the sense that politics is equipped to advance justice, then not only are we setting ourselves up for disappointment, but we're actually misusing politics and allowing it to use us.
Okay, so what did happen is, though, polarizing groups, polarizing opinions felt Mr. Trump will at least protect me, or Mr. Trump will at least keep me safe from that. What do we do now about that division has come across all faith peoples, all different race relations? What do we do?
Well, it's a troubling thing when you know that after an election, half the country is going to feel not just like they lost, but that they don't even belong in their own country anymore. And so what I hope, particularly people of faith, even those, especially those who voted for Trump, what I hope that they'll do over the next 4 years, starting on Friday, is making clear that their ultimate allegiance is not to Donald Trump or to a political party, but to their neighbor, and for religious people, to their God. And that means that they don't have to sacrifice their consciences or sort of be soft about areas where they disagree with Trump, with President-elect Trump, or where his administration is going to harm their neighbors. And I'd have the same advice for religious people who voted for the Democrat if we were talking about President-elect Hillary Clinton.
You know, you are a good person to give that advice, because you were such a young Christian when you started in the administration under Mr. Obama, and you had very different views on the faith issues. You were anti-abortion, you weren't in favor of same-sex marriage. How did you survive? Give us the advice, because that might be exactly how we have to approach the Trump presidency. How did your faith survive?
Well, you know, I just real quickly, I want to be, I was actually in a very similar place as Barack Obama in 2008 when he talked about reducing the number of abortions in this country, and when he told Rick Warren that he believed marriage was between a man and a woman. And so some things changed over time, but I agree with Barack Obama on far more than I disagree with him about. But even on those areas where we disagree, we have a rise of political independence in this country, people who have checked out of our two-party system of government. And what that means is that many of the voices that could be constraints on party agenda, that could keep parties open to people of different beliefs, they've left. And so now all we have in political parties are people who agree with every dot and tittle of the party platform. And we need to return to the point where we had diverse political parties that, yes, had coherent visions, but that also allowed for disagreement and vibrant debate, not just between the parties, but within them. And so I think that'll be important for the Republican and Democratic parties moving forward, which is, can we, as the people, force debates within the parties and between the parties that will lead to better outcomes for America?
All right. What is the White House like spiritually? You've been there a lot. What's the mood like there spiritually?
Well, President Obama would quote Abraham Lincoln, who said that Abraham Lincoln said that he had been driven to his knees many times while president by the overwhelming sense that he had no place else to go. And the pressures and the stakes of the White House certainly lead one deeper into spiritual things. I think just by the fact that the problems are so overwhelming, so immense that you'd have to have a confidence that I don't think many people have that you could solve them all by yourself. And so it's a place where people work long, hard hours, where they're stressed in dealing with huge issues, but it's also a place that I think can cultivate some deeper sensibilities, spiritual sensibilities that I talk about in my book, Reclaiming Hope, and there were times of great transcendence.
Well, you know, you really have got amazing timing with that new title of your book, Reclaiming Hope. And Michael Ware, thank you so much for being with us there from Washington, and all the best with the book tour. We'll put it up on the website as well. Let's all reclaim hope together in this whole process. Thank you very much, Michael.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Thank you.
Well, where does faith fit into a Trump presidency? Well, I think it depends on which religious leader you ask. We have a lineup of religious leaders from the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish faith communities for you today. We have Yoni Goldstein on the end, the editor of the Canadian Jewish News. Beside me, Dr. Basir Khan is a medical doctor and an active member of the Muslim community. And Stephen Lazarus, a research manager from Cardis, a Christian think tank. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you for having us. Great to be here.
Yoni, I want to start with you. I mean, I think most people might assume that Orthodox Jews would back Trump in kind of what he stands for. I mean, are you seeing divisions, though, within the Jewish community?
Yeah, there are a lot of divisions.
Okay.
You know, you're right. The Orthodox did vote, based on the data we have, did vote en masse for Trump. But if you look at the Jewish community in America as a whole, they had about 72% voted for Hillary Clinton. Now, that's down from Barack Obama's numbers in 2008, but it still shows the divisions that are really at the core of the community right now after the election.
Basir, I'll come to you next. I mean, Trump has been relentless with the Muslim community. He's talked about, you know, outright banning Muslims from even entering the U.S. How does your community respond now? I mean, now that that administration is coming into power?
Certainly there are tremendous anxieties there for all the reasons that you've mentioned. Trump is, from his immigration policies to potentially even, you know, creating another Muslim registry within the U.S. and even affecting U.S. Muslim citizens, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety as to what the future is going to be for Muslims. And I mean, we're already seeing it in terms of FBI data of anti-Muslim crimes. There was a 60% increase in 2015. I'm sure the 2016 numbers, which haven't been released yet, to the best of my knowledge, will even show an increase of that. So I think there's some real anxieties. I think the hope, I mean, the reality is Trump is president. He's going to be president. I mean, hope is that rhetoric, once he takes office, will start to tone down, and that, you know, someone who's going to be reasonable and rational and understands that he needs to represent all people, and hopefully the better good of the country and those that form government, because it's not just one person, will hopefully overtake that and sort of speak to the overall good of what the U.S. is in terms of an inclusive society. I think the other fear that we have as a community is what his foreign policy does. I think a lot of the rhetoric that Trump does or creates and spews is fodder for organizations like ISIS and other terrorist organizations. I mean, Muslims are most likely to be the victims of ISIS in terms of their crimes. And certainly we're sort of secondary victims as well from the fallout of the crimes that these other terrorist organizations commit. So to see a leader stand up and give more and add more fuel to the fire of these organizations is terrible. And I think the final thing that we're concerned about globally is Trump continues to support leaders like Putin, who are enabling people like Bashar, where we're seeing one of the greatest humanitarian crises in our modern day. And that continues to just exacerbate the Syrian refugee crisis. So I think those are sort of the areas that our community has pain points with respect to Trump's presidency and what his potential legacy may be.
There's huge questions, though, whether he's going to be a divider-in-chief or a uniter-in-chief. Are we going to see more of what we've seen all throughout the campaign, or are we actually going to see him grow in office? I think from a faith point of view, one thing that I find fascinating is that, you know, as people of faith, we believe we answer to a higher authority. And we believe that he answers to a higher authority, too. And he's going to have to. So I would say the faith community can be united around how can we hold all of our leaders accountable? How can we hold ourselves accountable to actually engage the process in a way that draws on the deepest and best parts of our faith convictions, faith traditions. Let's not leave it outside, let's bring it in, but in a way that raises the level of debate rather than drags it down, as we've seen it, I think, a coarsening of political culture in America, which was horrible.
Yoni, I want to come back to you. I mean, Trump is musing about moving the embassy, Jewish embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That can be argued is a very explosive move in the Middle East. What are people saying in your community, and how do we deal with that?
I think the original reaction was very positive, actually. I think people have thought a little bit more about it now, and there have been some threats from countries that neighbor Israel that a move like that could spell an end to any peace negotiations. It could lead to violence. So, you know, it's very much up in the air how it would actually play out. But I would say, and I would caution people who think this is going to happen tomorrow. It very well might. I mean, Trump is unpredictable that way. But he is far from the first president or president-elect to promise to move the embassy to Jerusalem. You know, even in Canada in 1979, Joe Clark promised to move the embassy, and you know, within a year, he had already gone back on that. So, you know, it's still an open question, and until it happens, I wouldn't count on it happening.
This is your last question to you. How can the Trump administration build back trust with the Muslim community?
I think it's going to take a bit of an effort, and I think it's going to have to. I think he's going to have to address the Muslim community directly, and there's going to be a need to build that outreach. I think it's critically important as we continue to deal with the whole issue of radicalization that the Muslim community is engaged as an active member and not seen as an antagonist in that process.
PureFlix.com is now available in Canada. Sign up today for your free 1-month trial and begin streaming over 3,500 titles.
It's from independent films to movies and short series.
Kids shows. Sign up for a free month. Give it a good try.
Watch your favorite content anywhere, anytime, like PureFlix original hit series Encounter. Enjoy the latest and best in faith and family entertainment. Available to you at the click of a button. Visit PureFlix.com and sign up for your free trial today. Brought to you by Crossroads.
I guess I would be interested because we are so affected by the Americas and everything, and I think that what they do with their government and what Trump's decision will be it protectionism, is definitely going to affect Canada.
To give a rundown on what a Trump presidency means for Canada, I'm joined now by Laura Dawson, director of the Canada Institute at the Wilson Center. She joins me now from Washington. Should Canadians be worried with Donald Trump as president of the United States?
I know a lot of Canadians are concerned about Donald Trump as president of the United States. If you just believe the things that he says, then there are reasons to be concerned. But I think if you look at the whole context, if you look at the limitations and opportunities that come with the office of the president, if you look at the constraints on his activity because of congressional and legal requirements, if you look at some of the people that he is appointing who, to me, seem to be fairly reserved, fairly constrained, then I think Canadians should be vigilant, but I don't think there's any reason to panic.
Now, a lot of Mr. Trump's campaign promises are rooted in protectionism, which arguably could spell disaster, trouble for Canada, especially as a key U.S. trading partner. Should we be worried? Is Canada in a better position than other countries as far as trade goes?
Sure. I mean, the way that President-elect Trump got elected was by appealing to a certain segment of U.S. society that was really disaffected by globalization, that was seeing their jobs and their livelihoods turned upside down, and he offered them an alternative. The alternative that he offered was, as you say, rooted in protectionism. But I think once you dig down into how these promises could actually be implemented, some of them could create more problems than they solve. So Canada should watch. Canada could be hit by some collateral damage. But I think that most of the aggressive trade measures are really targeting China, perhaps Mexico. that Canada is also preserved by the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, which exists prior to the NAFTA and does give Canada preferential access to United States markets.
Now let's talk refugees. Canada's stance is one of doors wide open, whereby immigrants' culture, customs can be preserved. Trump has expressed closing the border to certain groups. I wonder, should we expect to see a rise in immigrants to Canada, almost in a sort of safe haven positioning? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think we're already seeing that sort of rise of folks who might normally have migrated to the United States and are just seeing that Canada is a friendly, more welcoming area. I have a few concerns that there's a perception of Canada in the United States as being too open to immigration and not vigilant enough on border security, on screening of refugees, potential terrorism issues. I don't think in reality that Canada is too lax at all, but I think that Canada, the Canadian government, Canadians have a job to do to build confidence in the United States that Canada is every bit as vigilant on the security of our shared territory, but that Canada can have different and distinct policies when it comes to immigration and refugees.
Now, Laura, I want to flip the script, if I may. How is a Trump presidency good for Canada, I'm wondering? Let's go there.
Well, there's a certain amount of, tossing the cards on the floor, shaking it up, and starting over again. I mean, Canada has been asking to reevaluate, look at the NAFTA for years. There's lots of things in the NAFTA that haven't been updated since 1994, before we got the internet, before we got the digital economy. So looking at the NAFTA again may be a good idea.
Well, we'll have to end it there. Thank you, Laura. Of course, you're a great leading voice on this. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Well, let's wrap things up with the question I'm most asked about the Trump presidency. What do I think about President Trump? Well, despite his promises, Donald Trump can't really make America great again. But people acting justly, loving mercy and each other, and walking humbly with their God can. The race to the White House tested those qualities. So, with a full view on reality, I think God is more powerful than the electoral process or Mr. Trump, and I'm falling in line to pray for this new president. Mr. Trump delivered us a reality TV attention-getting campaign. He used racism and misogyny to stoke our fears for self-protectionism. But reality now hits Mr. Trump, and I admire that President Trump will now give his life to serving the world. I'm going to pray for him and all those around him, and I'm going to challenge myself and others to renew our respect and care to do that with each other. Thank you for joining us here at Context tonight. We hope you enjoyed the show and that you'll come back next week as we discuss mental health issues. It's going to be, Molly, it's going to be the National Let's Talk About Mental Health Day. And we're going to have that program on with our very special Context perspective. So we'd love to hear from you. Do you have a personal connection to mental health issues? I'm sure you do. 1 in 5 Canadians are affected by mental health, so we would love to hear from you. Send us a tweet, a Facebook, or an email. There's all the different ways you can get in touch with us. And maybe we should also close with another news story that we want to alert you to. Samaritan's Purse is asking for Canadian medical help. The United Nations asked Samaritan's Purse to set up a clinic in Mosul, Iraq. They are in dire need of some medical volunteers. So visit their website at samaritanspurse.ca. and see if you can help out. If you're a nurse or a doctor and you'd like to go to help the incredible crisis facing the refugees there. Speaking of websites, visit ours for John Stackhouse, our weekly blogger. He's got a great take on President Trump this week. And I've got my blog there, and there's lots of interesting things that you can read there and connect with us through the website. So for Molly Thomas, Sheldon Neal, I'm Lorna Dueck. Thank you for all of us at Context. It takes a village. Happy that you could join us tonight.